Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Christian Sands, and welcome to another episode of Welcome to the Sands Box, brought to you by the Monterey Jazz Festival. Today, I am so happy because I am interviewing a longtime friend. We both were in New York together right out of college, and to watch this man's rise to stardom has been incredible. I've been so proud of him. He's becoming one of the top film scorers in the world. And I'm so happy to call him friend. I'm so happy to call him brother. Please welcome the one and only Kris Bowers.
Yo, what's going on, Chris?
What's up, man?
Pleasure, man. Good to see you, brother.
Man, it's good to see you too. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah, you said it's 2015?
Yeah. So,
crazy.
man, so I was thinking about it before this interview. I was thinking like the last time I saw you, and I remember it was December 2015 at Sundance Film Festival.
Oh, wow. Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
I remember all the snow
that
was happening.
Right, you were playing there with Christian, right?
I was playing there with Christian and Ulysses Owens, and I think we were doing the after party for Matt Damon's The Martian, I think.
Wow, that's right. Wow.
Yeah. And so you were there with the Kobe Bryant documentary, Kobe Bryant's Muse.
Yeah, well, actually, we were there because we were. It's funny because they're still working on it, but I just finished Kobe's Muse, and then we were starting this other documentary about. Actually, maybe it was Muse because we're working on another documentary about his last season, but his last season was after that. Yeah,
Right. Well, I remember it was something about Kobe because I remember you were super hyped about it. You were like, Kobe Bryant. I remember we had a brief conversation about it because you were doing a lot that day. But how excited you were about working with Kobe because you got a chance to work with him on these projects, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, all the way up until he passed. Yeah, he's the man.
Yeah. So being from LA, right? Assuming you was a Laker fan, like Clippers. Right. And Kobe basically kind of being our Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
You know, how was that to work with him?
And pretty incredible. He definitely had a huge impact on me personally, and also just my approach to scoring. Actually, because I worked on Muse, and that was like one of the first projects I worked on, and I worked on it solely because one of the producers was a friend of mine. That was like we were in an all-star jazz band together when we were in high school. This guy named Jake Block, and he was a producer on the project. And remember when we were in high school that I talked about film scoring, and so he recommended me for it. And the thing with Kobe was that no matter what you were doing, if you were like the composer like me, or if you were cutting a trailer, you had to come down and sit in his office and talk to him about your process and your craft. And he had to feel from you that you had an obsession about your craft in the same way he did about basketball, and then like you were good to go. But from that point on, that first conversation, he was just always pushing me to just strive to be as great as possible, but in my way. Like in that first conversation, he was like, you know, he's like, this movie's obviously about me and my life, but I want you to think about each of these moments and what they remind you of in your own story, in your own life. And then think about what emotions that stirs up and write from that place emotionally, and it'll be great. And from that process on, he was always trying to, he would always call like John Williams my Michael Jordan, as far as like pushing me to try my best to continue to compare myself to John Williams, and like in a way that's like going to continue to push me to be greater.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it was amazing. And I went on to score. He wrote these children's books, and we did audiobooks that I scored, and we're still working on a documentary about his last season right now. And yeah, he was the man.
Man, it's so interesting. I've always wanted to meet Kobe. So like when I remember when we were having the conversation, I was like, dang, that's awesome. Because Kobe for me was another driving point in my creation and my creative process and all that, just like he was for you. But it's interesting to listen to your story about Kobe, because it reminds me of like having conversations with like Wynton Marsalis. It's very much the same thing, where going to his place, he'll sit you down and be like, okay, I need to know how serious you are about the music. where
Hmm.
we're going with this, what you're trying to do, because I need you to do this.
Hmm.
And there's
Yeah.
something that he sees in you that he brings that out of you, just like you're saying about Kobe Bryant. So
Yeah.
I always wondered what it would be like to have, like, if Kobe and Winton had a conversation together, like what
Oh
that would
yeah.
have been like, you know,
Oh yeah. That would have been pretty interesting. Yeah.
and how intense
Exactly. Yeah.
that,
Intense.
that would have been,
Yeah. For
you know.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after Kobe Bryant's muse and just working with Kobe, I know from being around, I think the next project you were working on was Green Book, correct?
Pretty much. I
Like
mean,
roughly.
yeah, yeah. I ended up working on a few other like sports
Yeah.
documentaries between Kobe
Yeah.
and Green Book, but yeah, that was like the next one of the next bigger projects for sure.
Yeah. And you're working with Mahershala,
Hmm.
which I'm a fan of course. Just,
Yeah,
you know,
same.
he's brilliant. How much did you guys get a chance to work together on that? Because it's a lot of piano happening, and
Yeah,
does he play piano? He plays a little,
a little bit.
right?
So I gave him lessons for about 3 months,
Yeah,
and similar. I mean, speaking of like work ethic and like, I mean, he was an athlete in college, and so I feel like that
right.
mentality is just such an interesting thing to witness. Like our first lesson, he told me that he, could find middle C and like kind of knew how to
Oh,
play enough
that's
to like make beats essentially. Like that was,
yeah,
and
yeah.
but he wanted to start from the beginning, and so I was like, well, let's just start with the C major scale, just so you can like
Yeah,
start to get like the basics and like crossing your hand, like all that kind of stuff.
right.
And that first lesson was supposed to be an hour, and he played a C major scale for 3 hours. And like just
Wow,
would not stop. Like I would have to actually literally pull his hand off to get him to stop because he was just so like zone in the zone.
wow.
And that that really made it so that by month two we were like working on some of the simple melodies from
Yeah,
Don Shirley, and then he would also have me, but because like the more complex Don Shirley stuff he wasn't going to be able to play, but he
right,
wanted to make sure that he was uh, like choreography wise in the right part of the piano, and so
right.
he would have me record myself on video playing these pieces so he could
Which I'm
study.
so glad, man, because like
Yeah,
watching it, I was like, oh, he might be playing this. He might not be playing, because he was in the right area. Because, you know, sometimes you see it on film
yeah,
where somebody's playing at the top of the piano and then their hands are way down
exactly.
here. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. Or like it's a Fender Rhodes sound, and you're like, but that's a grand piano. Like that
Yeah,
doesn't.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and he
Yeah.
was like super like such a stickler for making sure that that stuff was
Awesome.
as accurate as possible. And then so then yeah, we would like kind of figure out the choreography. He would like watch me over and over again, and then the rest of it is like CGI. Like most of
Yeah.
the when you're seeing it playing the playing, that's me playing with like his head on my body essentially. And
Right.
like
Oh, dig. Okay.
yeah, it was pretty incredible how they were able to do that.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, man. So now, were you prepared for all this stuff? You know, like, because you're film scoring, but now you're also in the films. Now you're working with these actors, and you are, you know, really involved in the process of creating these films. Now, were you expecting to do all this, or were you just expecting to just be behind the scenes and just create music?
Yeah, definitely. I was definitely expecting more behind the scenes. I mean, I've always wanted to be a composer ever since I was a kid, but I
Right.
definitely, didn't really know what that job was other than like, being behind the scenes and writing the scores. And so I
Right.
definitely feel like it was one of those weird things with the universe with Green Book because I feel like that started to establish this idea of me being capable of having these other roles in projects
Right.
and yeah, I think with that, with Green Book specifically, it was also just like, as you know, like when you study at the schools that we studied at, like it's such a, and or you're around people like Winton or Kobe or whomever else, like it's such
Right.
a high pedigree that like uh, Green Book was my first studio project, and there was such a high demand on what was being asked of me, but at the same time, it kind of felt like, yeah, like this is
Yeah. This is
this is
what you
what
want to
I
do.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like I wasn't really concerned about the size or any of that kind of stuff. I just wanted to do as good of a job as possible.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. So let's go back a little ways, just to the beginning, your start in music, right? Because you, like myself, we started when we were kids, like maybe
Yeah.
5 years old or something like that. So
Yeah,
just
exactly.
talk about just your upbringing and you know what got you into the music.
Yeah, so my parents, my dad decided before I was born he wanted me to play piano and like just weirdly he was he wanted to be a drummer when he was in high school and never really
Hmm.
pursued it. And he's I didn't know the story until recently, but he told me that he was driving and heard some piano music that like moved him emotionally, and he never really
Mm.
gets moved emotionally by many things. And so
Yeah.
it was that moment that made him feel like piano would be a good instrument to put me in. But
Mm.
he like learned music as I was learning it so that he could help me at home. Like he sat behind me while I
Yeah.
practiced, like from the time I was 4, like you were saying, until 15 essentially. And my parents just did whatever they could to find the best teachers. Like
Yeah.
I started with just like learning the notes on the piano, then started classical lessons, and then they went and found this jazz teacher because I was starting to get a little bit bored of classical, and they thought jazz
Right.
might be something. And
Right.
that was really what unlocked it for me, just because, like, as you know, just the expression and be able to express like where I was at emotionally,
Right. Right.
and and then they found the school called Colburn here in LA, where they put me when I was 8. They had me in classical piano,
Mm.
jazz band, and theory, because they just did as much research as possible to understand
Right.
like what I needed to do to be able to
Right.
succeed. So yeah, it was really just my parents continuing to push me, and then having those moments where teachers in the jazz space would continue to push me to figure out how to express myself. Like one of the other big shifts was actually with Gerald Clayton. We went to the same high school, but he graduated the year before I got there. But
Yeah.
my freshman year, he was one of my teachers. I studied with him and Donald Vega and Danny Grissett.
Yeah.
But Gerald was the one that was like up until that point, I was just like learning licks, and just like whenever I'd improvise, it was just me regurgitating licks
Right.
essentially.
Right. 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 Right.
And Gerald was like, "You should sing when you play, because if you sing when you play, you'll have no choice but to play what's coming from you in that moment. And like if you
Absolutely.
try to focus on what's coming out." And that lesson where he told me that just totally changed the way I thought about improvisation, and totally connected me to this idea of like genuine improvisation, and trying to figure out how to like work on my vocabulary enough, as you know, to like then
Right.
express it in a way, but not like just like prep a bunch of lines that I can then
Right.
regurgitate.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's funny that you said that because just listening to your early work and also just knowing of your playing when we first got to New York together,
Yeah.
right? Like hearing it, I was like, man, it's either Gerald or there's an LA thing.
Huh.
Because I noticed with LA cats, there's a especially with pianists, there's a bounce that you guys have. Like
Huh.
there's a bounce, there's a swag that you guys play with that not everybody has. There's a textural thing that
Hmm.
happens with you and Gerald. And I was like, man, there's something about LA. Maybe it's the sun or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah.
Something is happening. And so I always wanted to know. I never asked you that, but I always wanted to know how much time you spent with Gerald or how well you guys knew each other, because I always thought there was a kindred thing with you and Gerald, because the way you guys attack a certain phrase or the way you guys,
Mm.
play it, the way you play time is a very interesting and similar way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gerald and I spent a lot of
And
time
that
together.
makes
Like,
perfect sense.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, he was yeah, a huge influence on me, like at that early phase for me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So now coming to New York, right? Going to Juilliard, I was at Manhattan School of Music. I remember hearing about you through through colleagues, through friends like Jordan Pate. Shout out Jordan
Oh
Pate.
yeah, Jordan, man. Yeah.
Mike Catone. Shout out to Mike
Yeah.
Catone.
Yep.
Mike Catone's gonna be happy because he's been like mentioned in this series at least 4 times.
Oh
So,
wow. That's awesome. That's
so
awesome.
he's always around. Carl Allen, of course, the great
Yeah,
Carl
yeah,
Allen. He would talk
yeah.
about you. Like we would be on the road with Christian, and he would talk about you. Be like, "Oh yeah, check out Kris or whatever,"
Huh.
And so being in LA, being in New York, talk about the scene. Talk about just coming to New York, being at Juilliard, being around these cats. John Baptiste was around us a
Yep,
lot
yeah,
too.
yeah,
Shout out
definitely.
to J Bat. So,
Yeah.
what was that like for you?
Man, I mean, as you know, it was like I feel like New York is still the mecca when it comes to this music, and like hearing it live, being in that space, and just has such an energy. Like I remember
Yeah,
my freshman year at Juilliard, Eric Reed was my teacher,
yeah,
and we connected here in LA. Like he's actually a family friend, and so he was the teacher and mentor out here, and then he became my teacher at Juilliard. And one of the first things he told me, he was like, "You got to be out like every week, if not every night, seeing stuff and meeting
yeah,
people, and
yeah.
like really like." encouraged me to do that because he's like, that's the only way you're really going to get into this community is if you like
Yeah.
if you get out there. And so I think having that level of support and also pressure from him. As you know, like
Yeah.
he's also an intense guy.
Yes. 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 I know him well. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like already coming in with that demand on me, I think just kind of made it feel like this was normal in terms of like what it should be, but also getting out, it really connected me to more than just the Juilliard circle, which I think is
Right.
actually so interesting how much that helped my career. I feel like shortly, like while I was in school and shortly after school, I was playing more with like guys from New School than I was
Right.
guys from Juilliard. You know?
Right. 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 Right.
Yeah. So I think it was just really cool to. It's that community of peers. I think that's the most amazing thing about being in New York in college is that like you can meet, as you know, like with us, like you can meet people that are your age that are going to be like the next
Right.
generation of like great musicians. And I feel like so much of my growing came from playing in environments with those people.
Right. Right. And then just being in New York, I remember seeing you. I believe Hero of the Misfits had just come out or was
Huh.
just coming out,
Huh.
your album. And I remember hearing you work out the music at Winter Jazz Fest.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that show because I was playing with Otis Brown and I can't remember who else was in the band. It was like a wild night. That whole night was wild.
Yeah, as they usually
but
are.
but I do remember specifically. I remember you starting the show with the Protester.
Mm, yeah,
Because
yeah.
I like remember just sonically that was some music. I was like, man, he's got keyboards and all this kind of stuff, and like it had just a cinematic feel to it. So can you
Mm.
talk about that record? I mean, because that was like was that your first record or second record? That was your first one,
I say
technically.
first. Yeah, tell you exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I did this album actually. Carl Allen produced for some like Japanese record label like a year or two before that. That
yeah,
was mostly like me playing standards. So this was like my first record as like an artist, like me,
yeah,
my expression, and
yeah,
yeah, a lot of it was like thinking about because I got that record uh, deal with Concord from the Monk
yeah.
competition, and
Right.
so for me it was interesting because I never really thought that I would make my own album like that soon. I was like, I need to like become a person before I like try
Yeah,
to express
yeah,
myself on an album. And so that record deal just made it so that I had to kind of think about it. And for me, I just again going back to this connection with music through like emotion and storytelling, I was like, I need every piece of music on here to like be about something so I can have some sort of North Star that I'm trying to write to. That like
yeah,
it's always difficult for me to write music that's just based on like just the music. I need it to be based on like some sort of emotion or idea that I can like whenever I feel lost, I can just ask myself if I'm feeling the
yeah,
feeling that I want to feel.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, the Protester was one of the first things I wrote because like a lot of the record was me looking at just that time period, which we're still continuing in,
Right,
but like where it's called the Protester, but it's like hashtag the Protester because it's like this idea of social media activism and how much there's this power when you look at that time, like the first track on my album is called Forever Spring, which is inspired by
right.
like um uh the wow, now I'm forgetting what it's called, like the spring, the uprisings in like Egypt and like
Ah,
uh
yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah, but
yeah.
basically how all those
Arab
uprisings,
Spring.
Arab Spring, thank you,
Yeah,
how those things started um online. Like a lot of those protests started on Facebook or like people that were
yeah,
getting together through social media. And I was looking at how like in other cultures, social media was this tool of coalescing or coming together, and how in the States it really felt like there was this complacency sometimes where we would hashtag something and that was our act
right,
of protest, and like after that we
right,
didn't really do anything with it.
right.
And I feel like it was interesting to see how that's continuing today in terms of like it's gone much beyond that, and we're now I think incensed and frustrated enough with what's happening in our country that we are also using these things to like connect with one another or share information, and that
Absolutely.
translates into something that's actually going to happen in the real world. But I feel like at that time that was just the beginning of us figuring out how to use social media as a way for us to connect with each other about activism and social justice.
Yeah, man. And so, I mean, first of all, that's a beautiful explanation on that whole piece. Um, and what I love about it is just how in tune you are in the backdrop of what's happening, and that is film score. That is what
Mm.
you do. That's who you are, which is such an amazing thing because I've understood that about your playing throughout the as much as I've known you.
Mm.
And so now becoming this one of the most in demand film scorers now. Uh, how did that transition happen? How was it that transition where you were okay? I want to be a performer. I want to be a player. To now, I'm going to be doing this, and I'm going to be playing too because you still do perform out here.
Yeah.
But uh, what was that click for you? What was that like? You know what? This is it now.
Yeah. So I feel like it was a couple things. One, like I was saying earlier, I definitely the first documentary I scored was in 2011, and then I
Yeah,
didn't really score anything until the Kobe doc was
yeah.
um, in 2014, and then I did the Sundance Composers Lab, and like that got me
Mm,
even more. That really
mm.
made me feel like I think up until I did the Sundance Composers Lab in 2015, I was like telling myself that maybe I would try to find some sort of career where I was primarily a player and scored like indie movies and documentaries here
Yeah,
and there.
yeah.
And when I did the Sundance Composers Lab, it's like at Skywalker Ranch, you have people like Harry Gregson
Right,
Williams or mentors. Like there's
right.
all these people that come in, and it felt like there was something in me that clicked, and that combined with working with Kobe, where I was like, when I was a kid, I dreamt about doing this like on a big scale and working on huge
Right,
films, and like
right,
my idol was John Williams, so like I
right.
owe it to myself to really to try to go after it in that way. And then for the next few years, I was scoring documentaries. Like even I think about like during the APA competition that we did,
Yeah, yeah.
while we were doing that competition, I was like in my host family's home scoring a documentary like every
Okay.
night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
There's a period of time
Wow.
where like when I was on tour with Marcus Miller, I scored like two documentaries while I was on tour. So it was a lot of
Right.
like me scoring projects while I was touring,
Yeah.
and that was like not really working out because you try to do two things at the same time,
Right,
like
right.
kind of suffering essentially.
Absolutely.
Um, and so it was really I got um, Dear White People, the TV show, and then
Right.
this other documentary series called Religion of Sports, and
Mhm.
this children's animated thing called The Snowy Day, all at the same time. And them being TV projects, they demanded that I was in LA because they were like, we need to see you on a weekly basis. We need to have
Right,
meetings, all this
right,
stuff.
right,
And so that was in 2016. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to move out to LA, do these projects, see how that goes. And then, like, maybe after that, I'll decide whether or not I want to live
right.
out here.
Well, because I remember us having that conversation at
Mm.
APA. I
Oh,
remember
wow.
us having that
Wow.
conversation, and you were like, "Yeah, man, I think I'm going to go back to LA." I've been doing a couple different things, and so you didn't tell me what they were, but you were like, "I've been doing a couple things, and I think LA is the place I need to be."
Yeah.
You
Wow,
know?
that's wild. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I literally came out here, and after a month, I went back to New York just to pack my stuff up, and then
Right.
came out here come like full time. Yeah.
Right. Right. Man, it's such an amazing thing to watch the story,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
and just
wild.
how
Yeah.
how it moves with cats, man. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Totally.
I know we're running out of time. We have to do like a part two because I have like there's so many other questions I have for
Yeah.
you, and I know we're running out of time, but I guess I'll ask you this though, like now with everything that's going on with the Emmy Award, with the just this different platform that you have, how does that make you feel being more, I guess if you want to call it more mainstream, if you want to call it more just in the eye of the public? I mean, now you have definitely now with Bridgerton that's been out and just people just been going crazy over that.
Yeah.
How does that feel for you? Are you motivated? Are you still like, hey, I got more things to do, or are you like, where are you at with that?
Yeah. I definitely feel like, if anything, I think that it's continued to show me that like the thing that makes me happiest is like the process and
Yeah,
work. Like I feel like,
yeah,
it's anytime I've gotten caught up in the last few years with like what that social capital might be able to get you in other spaces, or like, can you build on it in different ways, or think about publicity or PR, like any of that kind of stuff. I feel like I
Yeah.
immediately was like uh, unhappy, and I feel like the
Yeah.
times that I'm happiest are like, other than in my personal life with like
Right.
my wife and like my baby, but like, but now,
Right.
and when it comes to work, the only times I'm happiest are like when I'm studying and like learning and then growing, and like,
Yeah.
I think about, as like when I went to the practice room, like the thing that made me happiest was to, like, I would start with my left hand and just like
Yeah.
practice my left
Yeah.
hand for like, and like that felt so good and
Yeah.
rewarding. And I feel like just finding that in scoring, and it's tough with like, it's amazing to be a part of these projects that are like popular and all these other
Yeah.
things. But I think the thing that I recognize is that the thing that's created attention or success is like the work, and so I can't forget
Right.
about the work.
Right,
Yeah,
absolutely. So let's talk about really quickly about your process, right? Because um, you've been commissioned to do so many pieces. I know there's one coming up for Monterey Jazz Festival.
yeah.
So talk a little bit about just well, if you can, what you're writing and just in how you really think about going about that. Whether it's a commission piece for MJF or whether it's for a film score, like watching a film and putting something to it. Just talk a little bit about just the ideas.
Yeah, so it definitely starts with me, with for me it starts with again, like story and emotion. And like, I'll first talk about with film and TV. The first part of my process is I'll watch through something or read through something a few times until I get a real sense of like the characters, the story being told, like the complexity of these humans that we're depicting, and like just connecting to it on a empathic human
Yeah,
level, like not even thinking about music. And then at some point there's a moment in there that like really strikes me emotionally, where I'm like, man, like I can feel that as a human, as like an audience
yeah,
member, like I feel that. And so
yeah,
then I start thinking about music, like what maybe the directors told me what they want this world to sound like. Maybe there's something about the story that calls for some sort of a sound or sonic idea. um and then I'll start to like play around with that to build a palette. But you always come back to like, what is that first moment that uh really speaks to me viscerally, where I can then like find the emotion. And so
yeah,
once I have an idea of the palette, once I have an idea of these characters, I've had a conversation with the director about the complexity of these people and how we're
yeah.
trying to show all these different shades of them. Then
Hmm.
I just like improvise to that idea, like trying to find something that feels like it's kind of getting in that
Right,
territory.
right.
And then once I find something I feel is working, then I go to the picture and I start playing it to picture, just like I'm comping, like just because, like I'm as if I'm
Yeah,
playing behind something where I'm like, okay, oh, I just noticed that like there's a cut right here. Like maybe if I do this, like I'll hit that cut, or at this point, like
right,
this character makes this
right,
expression. Maybe I should do that, or like this line is really important and denotes like a shift in the energy of the conversation. So maybe I'll
right.
like make a harmonic change there or a tempo change. So like I just kind of shape it to the picture and then kind of build on that and then orchestrate around that.
Yeah,
And it's really similar with this commission for Monterey Jazz Festival, where like the first thing I had to do was think of a story for myself to give me again a North Star. And thing that Tim and I talked about was the fact that we're coming up on the 30th anniversary on the marine
yeah,
sanctuary,
yeah,
in Monterey Bay, the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary.
yeah,
And Tim was like, "Would you maybe consider doing something around that?" And that immediately spoke to me, because my wife and I have a huge connection to not only the ocean but also to the Bay Area specifically. Like
yeah,
we were going to get married in uh, Monterey, Big Sur, Carmel area, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
had to cancel the wedding because of COVID. But like
Right.
we go on trips up there at least once or twice a year. Like
Yeah,
uh, I like, even though I grew up in LA, I feel like I have a deep connection to Northern California because of just the nature and the environment, the landscape. It's like really
right,
dramatic, and like
right.
I did like a writing retreat in Jenner, California. So I just love that whole area and just love being close to the water. So I was like, that I totally can get with that. And my wife and I are pretty much vegan. I was like, the idea of protecting
Yeah,
wildlife is important.
yeah,
So uh, that I was totally on board with that. So then I was like, okay, well, how can I create some sort of story around this? And also, again, thinking about palette. So I was like, well, palette wise, like it'd be great to dive into like the sound of the ocean because
Yeah.
like it's so musical. You think about whale songs
Right.
or like,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
thinking about whale songs, I then thought about a couple of documentaries I've seen about whales and how there's been a couple of instances where a mother whale and her calf have been separated, and the whale song that mother released was
Yeah.
like the loudest thing on
Yeah.
record, like the loudest
Yeah.
whale song on record, that she was trying to contact something that she knew was super far away.
Right.
Um, so then I was like, okay, well, like let me look at mother daughter stories, and I
Mm.
found this Greek myth, the Greek myth about Persephone, and like this
Yeah.
idea of
Yeah.
this mother losing her daughter to Hades, and the wrath that she
Yes.
releases causes Hades to give the daughter back. But there's this thing where it's only for a certain amount of time, and like that's why we have the seasons and
Right.
so on and so forth. And every winter is when the daughter has to go back to Hades. So thinking about all that, I was like, okay, well maybe there's a story here about a mother whale that loses her calf to humans essentially instead of
Right.
Hades, but
Right.
thinking about, I mean, even like as cliche as it is, like SeaWorld or things like that, like people that
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
taking these whales from their natural habitat,
Right.
and what happens when this mother whale and this cohort of female whales unleashes this sound that like
Right.
we have no choice but to give this calf
This
back
calf
because of
back. Yeah.
how intense it is. So
Absolutely.
now I have this like story, this structure, this scaffolding of a story that, and this idea of like, I've started to like transcribe whale songs or like looking at other like prepare. I've been messing around with prepared piano to like
Yeah.
find different techniques to like
Mm-hmm.
to create the sound of whales, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'll continue to create a theme for each of these characters,
Yeah.
and then start to build it from there. But again, it all comes down to like the emotion and the story.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I can't wait to hear this piece now. Like this whole thing. I'm glad I'm gonna be there for the whole time so I can like watch you like rehearse this and do it. I'm
Yeah,
so excited about this, man.
I
Uh
appreciate it.
Man, well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being on this podcast and like hanging out with me and us
Yeah,
having a conversation. Before I let you go, last question.
yeah.
How does your dad feel about all of this? Because your
Man, yeah.
dad and my dad are very similar.
Yeah, bro, they love each other when
They
they
like
met.
loved each other immediately.
Yeah.
So how does Pops feel about all of this stuff that you're doing and what's going on?
Man, he's so happy. I feel like it's interesting because he's definitely super proud. He's really like so happy. I worked on this film King Richard last year that like
Yeah,
my approach to the score was like an ode to him in a lot of ways, just because of like
absolutely.
Richard Williams, and like my dad definitely feels a lot of pride seeing me get to this point. I think what's interesting is that he for all my life was focused on like work and like competition, like all these things
Right.
that like driving me and pushing me and driving
Right.
me. And these days he's more concerned with like how I'm feeling personally, like how's my health, like
Yeah.
how am I dealing with like my wife and
Yeah.
I just had a baby, like how is that, like how's my wife,
Right.
like I'll tell him about work stuff, and I'm like excited, just tell him like I'm working on this project and this project, blah blah blah. And he's excited, but he's always like yeah, well how are you doing, like how's
Right.
Brianna doing, how's Coda doing, like
Right.
I think it's beautiful to also see him now get to this point where he's no longer pushing me in that way, but he's more so just trying to make sure that I'm a whole human and feeling good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, he's good.
Absolutely. I might have to do a Sandbox episode with just the dads.
Yeah, you
Like,
definitely should.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, that'll be long. That'll be a long.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, man. Well, thank you so much for coming,
Yeah,
and
my
it's a
pleasure. Thank
pleasure,
you.
man. I can't wait to see you out in LA. I'm gonna be out there for a little while, so
Dope.
we'll
Awesome. Yeah,
reconnect,
let me
man.
know.
All
Yeah,
right,
man.
cool,
Looking
man.
forward to it. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.